when my twin sister Lauren and I were little. People used to joke that we were two halves of the same coin. We looked alike, thought alike, and even spoke in unison without meaning to. But life has a way of taking those innocent quirks and turning them into something far more complicated. The most unsettling part isn't the arrangement itself. It's how normal it has begun to feel. At first, I felt like a stranger in my own marriage, like an outsider watching my life unravel. But over time, we established unspoken rules. Adam would spend 3 nights a week with Lauren and 4 with me. Holidays and birthdays were split. We avoided public outings that might draw suspicion. Lauren and I stopped discussing the situation openly. It was easier to pretend we were just sisters again when the subject didn't come up. Still, there were moments when the truth cut through the illusion. A look she gave Adam when she thought I wasn't watching. A private joke I didn't understand. And Adam, he acted as if he had achieved some kind of perfect harmony. I never wanted to hurt either of you, he'd say, as if that excused everything. I love you both equally. But love, I've learned, isn't equal. It's messy, uneven, and impossible to split neatly into halves. One evening, when Adam was with Lauren, I sat in our shared bedroom and stared at the wedding photo on my nightstand. My smile in the picture was radiant, my eyes full of hope. Now, that woman felt like a ghost, someone I could barely remember being. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Lauren, her face pale and anxious. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I braced myself for another confession, but what she said next left me speechless. "I'm pregnant." The words echoed in the silence, sharp and unforgiving. "What?" I whispered, though I'd heard her perfectly. "I found out yesterday. It's Adam's." Of course, it was Adam's. Who else could it be? The room spun as I tried to process the implications. My husband was having a child with my sister. "I don't know what to do," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't plan this." For the first time, I saw a crack in her composure, a glimpse of the guilt she tried so hard to hide. But instead of feeling pity, I felt an anger I couldn't contain. "You didn't plan this?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You planned everything else, Lauren. You stole my husband, and now you're having his baby." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. Years of bottled-up frustration poured out, every unspoken grievance clawing its way to the surface. "I gave up so much for this arrangement for you, and this is how you repay me." "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "I love him, but I love you too. Please don't hate me." Her words felt hollow, like an echo of Adam's constant justifications. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a punishment. When Adam came home later that night, Lauren and I were still sitting in the living room, the air thick with tension. He looked between us, sensing something had shifted. "What's going on?" he asked cautiously. Lauren's voice wavered as she broke the news. His reaction, a mixture of shock, guilt, and something disturbingly close to joy, was the final straw. I stood up, my heart pounding. "I can't do this anymore." Adam's face fell. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm done pretending this is okay. You chose her the moment you let this happen. And you," I turned to Lauren, my voice breaking, "you chose him over me." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. For the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of clarity. I packed my bags that night, leaving behind the tangled web of lies and compromises that had become my life. Walking away wasn't easy, but staying would have destroyed me. Months later, I heard through mutual friends that Lauren and Adam were raising the baby together. I don't know if their relationship lasted or if the guilt eventually tore them apart. What I do know is that I finally found peace, not in forgiveness, but in the freedom to rebuild my life on my own terms. Sharing a husband with my twin had been my darkest chapter, but it taught me an invaluable lesson. Some bonds are worth breaking, even if they leave scars. Let me know if you'd like this expanded further. It started when I introduced Lauren to my boyfriend, Adam. He was everything I'd ever wanted: kind, ambitious, and charming. They got along instantly, laughing over shared jokes and talking about interests I didn't even realize they both had. I should have felt relieved that my boyfriend and sister clicked so well, but instead, a tiny seed of jealousy took root. Was she too friendly? Or was I just being paranoid? We got married a year later. Lauren stood beside me as my maid of honor, her face glowing with happiness, almost as if she were the bride. That seed of jealousy stayed buried deep until it finally sprouted one fateful evening. It was late, and Adam hadn't come home from work. When I called him, his phone went straight to voicemail. Uneasy, I tried Lauren. She picked up on the first ring, her voice strangely breathless. "Is Adam with you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. There was a pause. No. Why would he be? Her response felt too quick, too practiced. A sick feeling curled in my stomach, but I let it go. Days turned into weeks, and the uneasy feelings kept piling up. Adam seemed distracted when he was home, and Lauren started canceling plans with me, claiming she was too busy. I knew something was wrong, but didn't want to believe the ugly truth. The confirmation came in the form of a misplaced hotel key card I found in Adam's coat pocket. Confronting him felt like stepping into quicksand. "It's not what you think," he said, his face pale. "Then tell me what it is." He hesitated, then whispered the words that broke me: "Lauren." It turned out their connection had deepened over time, fueled by the very similarities that made us twins. He swore it hadn't started until after we were married, but that did little to soothe the betrayal. Lauren, my other half, had stolen the man I thought was mine, but the real twist came when I demanded they end it. Adam refused. "I love you both," he said. "It's impossible to choose." To my shock, Lauren echoed his sentiment. "I never meant for this to happen, but I love him too. I should have walked away. Any sane person would have. But instead, we fell into an arrangement I can hardly explain, let alone justify. Adam stayed married to me while continuing his relationship with Lauren. On paper, nothing had changed, but in reality, everything was different. Some days, I tell myself it's better this way. At least I know where he is and who he's with. Other days, the jealousy and resentment threaten to consume me. I wish I could hate Lauren, but how do you hate someone who shares your face and your history? Our lives are a tangled mess of secrets and compromises, bound together by love, betrayal, and something darker, something that keeps us all tethered when we should have let go. It's a story no one else would believe, but it's my reality. I share a husband with my twin, and every day I wonder if that makes me a martyr or a fool. Let me know if you like further tweaks. Months passed, and I tried to rebuild my life in ways I never imagined. I moved to a new city, far enough away to escape the ghosts of my past, but close enough to keep in touch with the people who still cared about me. I found a job in a new field, something that felt fresh and exciting, and slowly, I began to regain a sense of independence I hadn't known in years. But even as I settled into my new life, the memories of Adam and Lauren lingered, haunting me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. Every time I saw a couple laughing together, every time I overheard someone speak of love and loyalty, a pang of regret twisted in my chest. I knew I had done the right thing by leaving, but it didn't make the pain any less real. One evening, a message from an old friend jolted me from my thoughts. It was an invitation to a small reunion. Friends from the past, including Lauren and Adam, who were apparently back in the same circle of people I had once known. The thought of facing them again after everything that had happened made my stomach churn. I debated whether or not to attend. Part of me wanted to confront them, to face them in the open and end this chapter for good. Another part of me feared seeing them together, their life moving forward as though nothing had changed. But after a week of wrestling with myself, I decided to go. I wasn't going to let them dictate my life any longer. When I arrived at the gathering, my heart raced. I spotted them almost immediately. Lauren and Adam sitting together on a couch, their child in Lauren's arms. It was a striking sight. Adam, the man I had once called my husband, now a father, his hand resting on Lauren's shoulder, an intimacy that made my stomach turn. I stayed on the periphery at first, greeting old friends and trying to blend into the background. But as the evening wore on, I found myself drawn to the familiar faces I hadn't seen in so long, the ones who remember me before all the chaos. It felt oddly comforting, like reconnecting with a part of myself I had almost forgotten. But then Lauren approached me, her face tentative, like she wasn't sure how to act. "I didn't expect you to come," she said quietly. I met her eyes, and for the first time, I saw her vulnerability. There were no defenses, no justifications, just raw guilt. "I wasn't sure either," I replied, "but I think it's time to let go of the past." Her eyes flickered to Adam, who was talking to someone across the room. "We've tried, to make it work. We never meant for it to hurt you like this." I smiled, but it was a bitter smile. "I don't think it was something you could control. Some things just happen, and when they do, they change everything." There was a long silence between us. I didn't know if she expected me to forgive her, or if I expected that from myself. But neither of us spoke those words. Instead, we just stood there, the weight of everything we had been through hanging in the air. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she finally said. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I've spent so long trying to make sense of it all, and I don't think I ever will." I nodded, my throat tight. "I think we've all made mistakes. I don't know if I can forgive you, but I can accept that we're all living with the consequences now." She gave a sad nod and turned away, disappearing back into the crowd with Adam. I watched them for a moment, the life they had created together, and felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. It was over. There was nothing left to fix. But as the evening drew to a close, I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Maybe I never truly was. Not at them. Not at the situation, but at myself for letting it go on for so long. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. In a way, the reunion had been a kind of closure. I didn't need to fight anymore. I had reclaimed my life, rebuilt myself into someone stronger and more capable of moving forward. I was free, no longer trapped in a cycle of betrayal and heartbreak. As I left the gathering, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The past had happened, and no amount of anger or regret would change that. The future, however, was mine to shape, and I was determined to make it one where I would no longer share a husband with anyone, least of all my twin. Let me know if you like any changes or additions. In the weeks that followed the reunion, I found myself embracing the freedom I had fought so hard to regain. The weight of the past seemed to lift as I focused on my own growth, making new friends and discovering passions I hadn't explored before. Lauren and Adam's life continued without me, but I no longer felt the sting of their presence. It was as if we had all silently agreed to move on, without words, without apologies, just acceptance of what had been. One evening, I received a message from Lauren. She apologized again, this time for the final time. But instead of feeling the anger that once burned inside me, I simply replied, "I'm at peace now." For the first time in years, I truly was. As the months passed, I realized that peace wasn't just about letting go of anger or hurt. It was about accepting the things I couldn't change. I didn't need to force a relationship with Lauren or Adam anymore. I didn't need their approval, their forgiveness, or their presence in my life. I focused on what made me feel whole again. I traveled, met new people, and started a project I'd always dreamed of but had put on hold for too long. The pain that once consumed me slowly faded into the background, and in its place, I discovered a version of myself I hadn't known existed. One that was independent, strong, and, most importantly, free. Then, out of nowhere, Adam reached out. He wanted to talk. He said he regretted the way everything had ended, and asked if we could meet for closure. For a moment, I hesitated. Would seeing him again stir up old wounds? But I realized I didn't need to meet him to find closure. I had already closed that chapter of my life. I'd already let go. I didn't owe him anything anymore, and I didn't need to revisit the past to move forward. I'm happy with where I am now, I texted back. And I think it's time we both moved on. It was simple, final, and empowering. I didn't need to share a husband with anyone. I just needed to share my life with myself. And that was enough. Years went by, and life continued to evolve in ways I never expected. The days of constant heartache and emotional turmoil felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I had built a new life, one where I wasn't defined by the mistakes or betrayals of my past. My career flourished, and my circle of friends expanded. I was no longer the woman who shared a husband with her twin, but simply a woman living her life. But no matter how much time passed, there were moments when the ghosts of my past would still surface. It wasn't the sight of Adam and Lauren that haunted me anymore, though I had heard through the grapevine that they had stayed together and even married eventually, but the quiet, lingering doubts that would creep in when I was alone. Had I made the right choices? Was I truly healed? Or was I just hiding from the pain that would never fully go away? Then one fateful day, I received a phone call that sent everything spiraling back. It was from Lauren. Her voice sounded shaky, and I immediately knew something was wrong. "I need to talk to you," she said, her words tight. "It's about Adam." The knot in my stomach tightened. I hadn't heard from her in years. What could this be about? He's gone," she said softly, her voice breaking. "He passed away this morning." For a long moment I couldn't speak. The world seemed to freeze as her words sank in. Adam, the man I had once loved, the man who had torn apart my world, was gone. There was no room for anger, no space for relief. Only a hollow emptiness that I hadn't expected. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I didn't know who else to call. I felt a strange, almost out-of-body calm wash over me. I couldn't cry, couldn't feel anything at all. There was no anger, no regret, no joy in his passing. Just nothing. A part of me realized I had already mourned him years ago, when I let him go, when I accepted the reality of what he had done. "I'm here if you need anything," I told Lauren, my voice steady. It was the right thing to say, but I couldn't help but wonder why she had called me. Perhaps she just needed someone who knew the history, someone who had lived through the same lies and betrayals, someone who could understand the complicated grief she was feeling. I agreed to attend the funeral, though I didn't know what to expect. Standing there, seeing him in that casket, felt like a surreal moment. The man who had been my husband, the man who had betrayed me with my own twin, now lay still, a quiet shell of who he had once been. Lauren stood beside me, her face pale and drawn. We exchanged a few words, but there was nothing left to say. Words couldn't fix what had happened. They couldn't undo the years of pain or the choices that had led us to this moment. As the ceremony ended and people began to file out, I stayed behind for a moment longer. I stared down at the grave where Adam was being lowered into the earth, and I finally allowed myself to feel. I felt a strange sense of release, a closure I hadn't expected. It wasn't that I was glad he was gone. It was more that the chapter he had opened in my life was finally, irrevocably finished. The tangled web of lies, betrayal, and heartbreak was no longer a part of my story. I had lived through it, I had survived it, and now I was free of it. Lauren approached me quietly, standing beside me in the silence. "I don't know how to feel," she admitted. "I loved him, but I also know he hurt us both. So much." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a woman who had lived through the same struggles as I had, albeit in a different way. She was my twin, but she had been through the same kind of transformation I had. We had both been shaped by the choices we had made, by the love we had shared with someone who had ultimately betrayed us both. "I think we've both spent enough time carrying the weight of him," I said softly. "It's time we let go, once and for all." Lauren nodded. Her eyes filled with tears. "I think you're right." I don't want to carry him anymore. As I left the cemetery that day, something deep inside me shifted. I had come full circle, facing the past with all its scars and bitterness, and finally releasing it. I had spent so many years trying to heal from Adam's betrayal, trying to understand the choices that had led us to this point, but now I saw the truth. Healing wasn't about forgiving him. It was about forgiving myself and letting go of the past. I hadn't shared a husband with my twin anymore. I hadn't shared anything with her in a long time, except this final, quiet understanding that we both had been hurt, but we were still here, stronger, wiser, and free. I no longer needed to dwell on what could have been. The future was mine to shape, and that's where I was headed, one step at a time. The months after Adam's funeral passed in a blur, a quiet, peaceful blur. I didn't know what I was expecting when I agreed to go to his memorial, but it wasn't the sense of calm that washed over me afterward. Perhaps, in some strange way, his death had brought closure, but more than that, it gave me something else. The permission to stop living in the shadow of the past. Life moved forward in the most unexpected ways. I stayed in touch with a few close friends who had known the full story. They offered words of support and understanding, but mostly, they respected my space. My life, once tangled with Adam and Lawrence, had grown into something new. It was quieter, simpler, and far more honest. I traveled a lot over the next year. It was as though the world was calling me, offering me the chance to rediscover who I was without the weight of old memories holding me back. I visited places I'd always wanted to see, but never could because my mind had been elsewhere. Tangled in a love triangle I never asked for. I hiked through forests, swam in oceans, and stood on mountaintops that made me feel small in the best way possible. There, in the vastness of the world, I realized how much room there was for me to grow, to exist and to heal. One day, while on a trip to a small coastal town, I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he was everything I hadn't known I needed. He was kind, attentive, and patient. He didn't rush me or ask questions about my past. He let me reveal it at my own pace. We spent a lot of time talking, but it wasn't the kind of heavy conversations I was used to, no messy pasts or lingering regrets. Instead, it was light and easy, full of laughter and shared interests. He was the kind of person who made me feel like I could just be, without the layers of pain and history weighing me down. It wasn't love at first sight. In fact, it was a slow burn. But somewhere along the way, I realized I was letting myself love again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Daniel never made me feel like I had to explain myself. He simply accepted me for who I was in that moment. He didn't need to know every detail of my past to see who I had become. That feeling of being accepted for me, without needing to justify any part of my existence, was a gift I hadn't realized I needed so badly. As the months passed, our relationship deepened, but I carried with me the lessons I'd learned from the past. I wasn't willing to rush into anything this time. I wasn't looking for perfection. I was looking for honesty, for trust, and for the kind of connection that felt grounded in reality, not in the fantasies we sometimes create to fill the empty spaces. Then, one evening, Daniel took me out for dinner in the same small coastal town where we had met. As the sun set over the horizon, he reached across the table and took my hand. "I want to be with you," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "But I don't want to rush anything. I want to build something with you, something real. You've been through so much, and I understand that. I just need to know that you're ready for this too." I took a deep breath. A part of me wanted to rush ahead, to dive into the safety of this new connection. But another part of me, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, and scarred, reminded me that this time would be different. I had learned the importance of patience, of understanding, and of letting things unfold naturally. "I'm ready," I said, my voice full of conviction. "I'm ready to build something real too." And for the first time in a long time, I knew I was no longer defined by the events of my past. The wounds of the past had scarred me, yes, but they had also shaped me into someone stronger, someone who had learned to trust again. I wasn't the woman who had shared a husband with her twin. I was simply me, a woman who had survived, who had loved, and who was finally able to move forward. I realize now that love isn't about perfection. It's about growth, acceptance, and understanding. It's about finding someone who sees you, truly sees you, and still chooses to walk beside you. With Daniel, I knew I had found someone who would never ask me to relive the past, who would never try to fix me, but who would simply hold my hand and help me build a future. In the end, the past never truly leaves us. It stays with us in the lessons we learn, in the scars that remain, and in the strength we discover within ourselves. But I had finally made peace with mine. I had stopped sharing my life with the shadows of Adam and Lauren. Instead, I had started sharing it with someone who knew how to love me for who I was, not for who I had been. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift of all.